The role of the modern agency,
Yeah.
you know, I do think that our roles have probably evolved a lot, you know, especially within the past 3 years.
Yep.
Post-pandemic,
Yep.
age of AI. I do think as a creative, you know, I feel that I'm much more involved in understanding a lot more of the technical implications of the work. It's less about the one big thing, the big Super Bowl spot. It's more about content at scale.
Yep.
It's more about taking a single idea and expressing it in a very complicated ecosystem.
Yep.
An ecosystem in which, you know, many people don't even understand. So really being able to articulate ideas which are meant to be simple
Yep.
across a very, very complicated sort of environment in which if the idea itself isn't expressed within the purity of its origin,
Yep.
it falls flat. And, you know, unlike the past, you don't have too many opportunities to fall flat. Here, you know, you get 1,000 at-bats at once. And if one doesn't work,
Then there's a problem.
then the rest
Chain
don't work
reaction.
either.
Yep.
So it's, I do feel the stakes are much higher. I do think that the job was a lot more fun. Not that I'm not having fun, but I do think that a lot of what we're faced with right now is the unknown.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with everything you've said, and I've lived through a lot of that as well. I think one of the things from a CEO perspective is I feel that CEOs need to be close to the product. So everything you're talking about is a lot of that's about the product, right? How it's changing, how it's shaping, the ecosystems it lives in. Products now being digital first, they live and breathe, right? They get changed, they get people mess around with them. It's not like the old days where you shoot an ad or do a bit of radio or do your press and like people are looking at it. It's almost like, oh, now people are playing with your stuff. So I think for me, you've got to be closer to the product to understand. To your point of, you know, technically things are changing. You've just got to understand the implications of an idea, where an idea can go, how an idea could be interrupted and, you know, played around with in a positive way, but in all kinds of ways that you cannot imagine and foresee within the agency walls. So I also think that puts a premium on being out in the world. If you're running an agency, you've got to find time to be out in the world. And yes, that could be digitally kind of on the platforms, but actually physically in communities where people are creating, where ideas are being sparked, where experiences are being lived. You've just got to like bring that in, because for me, the worry of a modern agency is that you do leave it to the screen or the, you know, digital and the platforms and the tech, and I love all that stuff, just to be clear, but you've got to have the human.
100%.
You've got to have the human, and I think as leaders, we've got to remind our teams that, you know, ideas and emotions are intrinsically human.
Absolutely.
So I think there's got to be a lot of that in running modern agencies to be successful.
Could not agree more. And I do think the good tension that we're up against today is the fact that as technical and advanced as we are getting, you're right. The unlock is the human aspect, and how do you bring that level of humanity to something that is inherently synthetic? You know, and so it's a different kind of challenge that we're seeing today. And you know, I think you and I both come from, I think, more digital backgrounds, and I think you know our past, you know, involving CRM probably gives us a little bit of a leg up, because you know we are inherently systems thinkers, and I do think, you know, that is probably benefiting us more now than folks who come from a more traditional background, because today everything is a system. So thinking about how you run your agency, how you deliver creative, and how you manage your client's business, it's systems on systems on systems. And if you can't orient yourself within the connectivity of all the different moving parts, I think, you know, it's almost impossible to be able to survive.
Well, it's a problem. I think that's so well said, right? Because, the art of selling, right, and hustle that agencies have.
Yeah.
Again, when we came in the industry, it was pretty linear, right? You knew your agency's product. Normally, if you're in a good agency, it had a brand as well that would kind of half open the door, and then you would become brilliant at understanding that product and being able to sell that within your client's ecosystem, right? What was good for the brand, for the company, etc. Now, to everything you've said, you've got to understand the ideas are inherently social. They're going to be inherently amplified. They're going to be in the world and spread. Your product's is not as pure cut, right? And those systems that you talk about are all interfaces for you to be able to sell in whatever the idea is to its full potential. Right. You've got to know what those connection points are, where the idea hits a point in that ecosystem, good or bad or indifferent. That should also be part of the selling, but that's complicated, right? I sometimes look at some of the people coming into the industry and I think, wow, like to really be able to drive selling in great work, being passionate about that, and also helping clients to sell on internally, we should never forget. It's become infinitely more complicated. Not impossible, but it's just much more nuanced than it was.
Totally. It does feel a bit like 5D chess.
Right.
Where to your point, in the past, I think it was quite linear, quite clear.
Right.
The path to selling an idea or executing an idea just felt infinitely easier than it does now. And I think you bring up a very good point. The medium is the message, and the message is the medium, right? And 100%. So, it's not just coming up with a single idea, but it's actually understanding the intricate nuances of every particular medium, which are becoming more and more complicated by the day because of algorithms, right? And 100%. Understanding that message sitting in that place at that time and and so
will it get the cut through? Like, will it be heard?
Will it be heard?
Will the algorithm pick it up, right?
Exactly.
And you got clients who will say things like, I love that idea, and we could do something with our social channels, right? We could do something from a content standpoint, put it in our content series. We've got influencers, and suddenly you're like, you've not even sold the thing in, but it's already being crisscrossed into those systems. So when you think about ideas breaking through and really driving brands, you got to have a feel for that. You got to kind of understand that. And it's difficult because all of those places are changing, right? And there isn't like a playbook that you can, from an agency standpoint and a product standpoint, you can say like, we do this kind of idea, that's how it breaks through, that's where it interconnects. So it's a lot of unknown.
So I guess it's our job to write the playbook, right? There's no playbook.
Well, that's part of that's a good point. I think someone needs to write that playbook. It's funny, there's a lot of talk at the moment around this idea of humans in the loop, which is, we know we live in an algorithmic tech platform world, but getting that human aspect. And I know personally of two people that are writing books around humans in the loop, which is essentially, one is on an agency side, one is actually at a platform. But it's essentially trying to write a playbook of how you understand this new world for the good of getting great ideas and great product and building great brands and businesses. But it hasn't been written. This thing is happening so fast.
Exactly. And sometimes by the time you finish writing it, it changes completely. Right? Like, who would have thought even 2 years ago, seeing what AI can do today, just the velocity, the sheer velocity in which, you saw that Will Smith eating spaghetti, and then literally Coke just launched their Christmas spot using AI. I mean, that was 2 years, 3 years. I mean, we've seen a lot in the industry. I don't know if I've ever seen
so quick
a jump happen so quickly. And
it's a real moment for the industry when a brand like Coke does that. Whether you love the ad or don't like the ad, right? It kind of doesn't matter. It's a real seminal moment for brands all over the world will think differently. right? And agencies are gonna have to step up, even if that's not your core competency as an agency. You have to understand it and what that means. So that's like for me, that's a real moment that we can't. You can't do the agency thing and say, it was X or Y, or we could do. You've actually really got to understand what that can mean for how clients are going to brief us, what their expectation is, and the aesthetic of creativity. There's a lot rolled up into that. I think it's a minute ad, but
Right, and I think expectation is the right word. To your point, is it the greatest ad? No, it's not meant to be. What they did was they decided that they were going to use that moment to set a new expectation.
Right.
So to your point, what it launched Thursday of last week or whatever, everything's different moving forward because that's the new expectation of what can be done in a medium that was traditionally quite human.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. 100%. And then the other thing as well is, when we talk about sort of product and agencies and being successful, I think culture and its role and how agencies, I remember my mom was in advertising, right? She worked in advertising for 40 years. So, I remember being a fan of ads when I was growing up, right? The new Guinness ad, the Levi ad, the Volvo ads, like a bunch of brands. And, I was a real fan of that. And definitely I'd go to school and talk about ads with my friends, right? Absolutely, no doubt, right?
I did the same, I remember that,
Less media, those were mini moments. We all bought into that. Now a lot of those moments are being created in culture, out on the streets, in communities, right? And again, how do we as agency leaders, how do you stay connected to that? Because that's a lot. Like, there's a lot going on that we've all only got 24 hours in a day. But somehow, if you're going to sit in front of brands and lead brands, you've got to have a finger on the pulse of where culture's going. And I don't mean knowing that what's culturally hot on a platform and then being sort of reactive and getting your brand out there. That's one way. But, consumers get tired of that. And I can tell you the next generation, I got a 16-year-old rather, they're not going to dial into that type of approach. You know what I mean? If you're a brand, are you in? Are you enabling? Are you adding? Are you additive to our culture, our vibe? Difficult, right?
Really difficult,
but necessary.
What was once monoculture, right? Like, my birthday is on February 8th.
Right.
And growing up, a big moment on February 8th was the NBA All-Star Game, which meant Nike was going to launch a new pair of Jordans.
Right.
So for me, it was that waking up that moment, that day, knowing, running to the television, waiting for that spot to run, knowing it was going to run on inside the NBA or whatever, and having this rush of excitement where that Monday morning I go to school. That's all we would talk about. That's all we would talk, and we would unpack every piece of that thing. And to your point, today that just doesn't exist.
100%.
And it's not just about being in culture. I think it's being in cultures, right? Because there is no monoculture. So when you think about, I think this past election was a big wake-up call for us in terms of, are we listening to everyone, right? Do we hear all voices? Do we hear all truths, right? And I do think the idea of all truths, whether you believe in it or not, exists because people do live in echo chambers. And
the algorithms make sure that you stay in
and the algorithms keep them in those echo chambers. And like it or not, you need to meet them where they're at. Right? And so 100%. The idea of being in culture, again, you have to work so much harder. It's not setting up a social media war room in a room like this anymore and got a Twitter stream running.
Remember those days?
Yeah, that was easy. It was so easy.
Crazy.
Like, look what's going on. Look at the hashtag, right? And you thought and we were excited.
Yeah, we were like, exciting. We got it.
Because it was the first time we felt plugged into something that 100%. Felt real time.
100%.
But now, I mean, you couldn't.
By the time you do the dashboard, like,
there's no dashboard that can contain.
No one's there.
There's no one there.
It's not telling you anything.
Exactly.
God, that's such a great memory. I remember those days when we would set up those war rooms. I think Gatorade was one of the first global brands that did it. And then I was working on Microsoft at the time, and then other brands, Nokia and blah. But that's gone, right?
That's gone.
That's gone. And that was those things were like proof points for agencies.
Right.
Didn't matter if you're a creative agency or a digital agency or data or CRM.
Right.
Those are proof points to say that we were connected.
That's right.
Right. And part of our role as an agency was to help decipher what that dashboard was saying into ideas and work to build the brand.
Signal and noise, right? Separate the
Signals
from the noise.
Oh man,
exactly.
you know, all of that.
Yeah.
So what is it now, man? And I'm asking that because I don't have the answer, but like what is it now?
I think the noise has gotten louder and the signals have gotten more difficult to see.
Yeah.
I think that for the first time, we have to come to terms with the fact that we're not in control. The consumer is in control, and we need to tap into them in order to, and I say this a lot to my clients, in order to not just deliver value, but to deliver values, right? Because if a consumer today doesn't feel like you as a brand have the same values as they do, you're not getting their dollar.
Right.
It's just not gonna happen.
1000%.
So not only do you have to sell on the value of what your product, service, whatever does, you have to also align with the values of a spectrum of identities. It's not just like, 50% here and 50%. It's like literally election level targeting, micro targeting to the ultimate degree. So again,
so that intersectionality is real, right? And people will decide which hat they want to talk to a brand or integrate with a service on, right? They will, one day they'll be the music person, next day it could be the corporate persona, and that's moving all the time, right? Now that we've got that in the technology in the palm of our hand, we can put on different personas within one swipe. We're someone else.
That's right.
It's still us, but part of our character.
That's right.
Brands, man. I mean, how do we go to brands confidently and say, you know what I mean, and say that we understand that?
Yeah. It's really hard.
Part of what I think we have to, as agencies, get better at doing and consultancies is you got to go on journeys with clients. Like, because we're so used to going in and having the answer as agencies, right? We say we listen, and we do listen, but we also have an answer, right? It's not our natural game to say, you know what, we're going to figure that out together.
It's true.
Right?
It's true.
And agency heads will say, you haven't got time for that. Right? By the time you start to try and figure with a client, they'd have got the answer from someone else, you're done.
Totally.
So, which is probably true in many cases. So how do we learn together to be confident, to really have belief in what we're saying and selling, knowing the dynamics of how quickly cultures and values and value creation is moving so fast? Well,
what I hope will happen is that AI is freeing us up from a lot of the mundane, boring stuff that we've traditionally had to do.
Agree. Yeah.
And I often ask myself, what do you do with that extra time?
Right.
Go on that journey.
There's a lot we can do with that time.
Right.
Actually.
So
there's a lot to do
that
with time.
extra time has to be allocated somewhere else.
Yeah.
And in my mind, you said it perfectly. That extra time has to be allocated for you and your client to go on that journey and to figure out who are we, when are we, how are we, where are we at any given moment. And it's not a one size fits all kind of thing. It's actually the idea of being a fluid brand, and the idea of a fluid brand, I don't think is new. The first brand that I think I was really turned on to, actually two brands come to mind that I was really turned on to that I think helped formulate just my overall approach in this conversation was Absolute and MTV.
Okay.
And what they were able to do was they did a really good job not trying to broadcast culture, but they used their brand to editorialize culture, and they did it always, right? Every time you turned on MTV, that logo looked different. And you knew what was going on in the world by that logo. You're like, there's the astronaut guy. It's tech. Or there's right. There was something inherent in the brand that was able to carry culture and disseminate it in a way that felt real to us. And the brand became a container that we relied upon for that culture. Today, we kind of have to do that at scale, with every brand. You know, you no longer have the luxury of saying, you know, this is who we are, and this is, you know, and I do think that the rules have changed, and modern marketing has changed, and brand building has changed to the degree in which there's no longer that single brand essence.
So that's really interesting. And sorry to interrupt you. The reason why I jump on that is because I listen to a lot of brands talk about influencers, and I look at some of their influencer strategies, and it seems a little bit, it's over here for one activation, over there. And one of the things that I believe in is that modern brands just very simply have to have a creative strategy, which is like the brand DNA in essence. And I think that's become more truncated, right? And more focused. Because before it'd be like the Bible and everything, and we all had to learn it. And then I think you've got to have a true creator strategy as a brand, right? And within that, you've got to be thinking social content, influencer, commerce, because more sales are done in those spaces, right? And I think then you've got to find sort of the Venn diagram, the sweet spot, right? But a lot of brands are thinking, I've got my influencers, you know, I'm sort of doing social, I'm with the creator community. What they're not, I don't think, understanding is that diluting their brand, right? Because they're now popping up in a myriad of places in very different ways. And so the understanding of what is the brand, what is the essence, and how do you really protect that and grow that versus just being in social and just being active and that fluidity, because I think there does need to be fluidity. But at the moment, I don't know that any brands are really catching my eye of having a strategic and a very consistent way of managing that fluidity.
I would agree. I think there's some brands doing one well, other brands doing the other side well, but you're right. I don't know that we've quite yet seen that singularity of those two things being done in tandem. But I guess that's part of the challenge now. You know, 100%. And there's not a single person in this industry, at least that I've spoken to, that isn't grappling with that at the moment, because it is a very difficult puzzle to solve.
The one brand that I thought was doing a great job was Beats by Dre. So around, you know, they launched with a piece of film, I think it was called Who Do You Love? They had a bunch of ambassadors. To your point on values, they had a real point of view on the quality of sound. So it wasn't like just a fashion accessory and looking cool. They had a real point of view from Dre of music needs to be appreciated, and you can only appreciate it fully if you have the quality of sound. So you had shared values by dialing into that brand. And almost the big name superstars, they had all the soccer teams in Europe, they had all the NBA teams, they had boxers, all kinds of sports people. They were almost like in the background. Whereas a traditional brand approach would have put them in the foreground because it was around quality and it was around, you know, the experience of music and what it does to you emotionally. They didn't need to dial up, you know, the LeBron kind of activation. And I thought that they were just managing to sort of be in there. And then they went to sort of creators and sort of the youth, if you will. They went to sort of up and coming artists. And it just held true that they were all, for me anyway, they were all being held together by this view on, you got to love music. And if you're going to be stirred emotionally by music and understand music, and they were giving messages, cultural messages around understanding certain cohorts, like the black community or whatever, or the hip hop community, but it was going beyond that. It was going to a point of, you buy into the brand because of their value and the values they have in terms of sound. But I feel like in the last few years, I don't know where that's gone. You know what I mean? I don't know where that's gone. And I thought they were going to use that as a platform to get a lot of the creator and maker communities where sound's super important in their content, you know, in their podcasts, in their whatever. They were going to continue that through. I don't know where it went.
I think I have an answer. Not sure if it's right or wrong, but sustaining that is exhausting. Right? Sustaining that is exhausting. And think about everything you just said, sustained. Holy, it's a lot. Right?
That's a lot.
And so it is this, you know, we oftentimes hear the the term content supply chain.
Yeah. Yeah.
It truly is a supply chain, because what does a supply chain do? It keeps that consistency. It keeps that delivery mechanism, and it's quite complicated, right? And in order to fill that supply chain, you have to have a endless amount of ideas, content, to your point, iterations of the creator, the brand, the culture, the influencer, and it's all of these configurations that need to be fed into this supply chain that's distributing. Just describing that to you right now, I'm exhausted. Seriously.
That's a lot.
That's what I mean.
And is that even the agency's like true ground to be able to?
We're not built like that. We're not built to be this kind of factory, and I don't mean factory in a bad way.
Right,
actually,
no, I get it.
But this sort of the velocity and taking an idea and making it potent enough that it can contain what's needed to fill that pipeline.
Yeah. It's almost like a manufacturing mindset to an idea.
Basically.
Right?
Basically.
And that's different.
That's
very different to how agencies were set up, how they prospered.
Right.
But it's everything that we have to consider. And as an agency leader, whether you want to go that route or not, I think you need to have a point of view.
100%.
You know what I mean? Like
100%.
You need to have a point of view, because if you don't have a point of view, then things will pass you by.
Right.
And also there's scales to everything, right? So there's the massive scale of if you try and sort of deliver everything I was just talking to for that brand. Yeah. But there's also you as an agency and with your client, there's sort of like, there are subsets of that scale, right? So you need to understand what does that manufacturing mindset look like, and then how can you apply it? But again, that's very new.
It's very new.
I don't know any playbook in any agency.
It's not built. It's not built yet.
You know what I mean?
It doesn't exist. And I think we're at a very interesting time. We grew up with the great agencies, the BBHs and the JWTs, and they don't exist anymore. JWT doesn't exist. To your point, there's this evolution of what we do that is having a profound effect on how the agency model is not just run, but I think the culture. Where Madison Avenue was about that high touch, high sell, 3 times a year, and then the rest of the year we did our thing. Now it's always on, tech first, AI first, algorithm first, right? And it just takes a very different culture and mindset and machine to be able to deliver on not only on a much more complicated ask for our clients, but in many cases, our clients don't even know how to articulate what it is they need because it is so new. So I oftentimes find myself not just listening to a brief, but actually helping to articulate it in a way that kind of fits a little bit of what we're talking about. But again, there's no right or wrong. We're similar to the beginning of digital, we're just kind of making it up right now and seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, and putting pieces together that hopefully allow us to deliver on a vision for not what our brands need, what their audience needs, right? Yeah. So, and they're insatiable.
Yeah,
they are insatiable.
It's funny because I remember like 1.0 .com bubble, 98, 99, whatever. And I was one of these people that was taking around internet sites on laptops in cache memory.
I remember those
days.
Those
days and faking that you were connected because Wi-Fi didn't exist, right? And the conversation, to your point, the conversation at the time was about what we could do for the brand, not really the end consumer, right? It was the brand. Now in this paradigm, so Web 3.0, it's being driven by the consumer brands trying to catch up, right? So I suppose 2 anxiety points I think any agency owner and leader should have is, what is the role of the agency then? And how do you reimagine your role in that ecosystem? Because it now, even that's become an ecosystem, right? And when we talk about our product, right? Because product should be everything. That's the value, right? That we deliver. Where does our product, where does an idea fit within that?
Right.
Like how do we get people to understand? Because it's always been said, agencies have never really being able to articulate the value of an idea. You just know, we just always knew when there was an amazing one that would change the game. But now you've got, 7-8 billion people that have potentially got access, whether it's personal or through a public post, to this thing called the internet, and they can all give an idea. They can have a point of view. So where do agencies, where do we step up and say, well, do we step up and say, no, this is how you really do it? Or do we learn to be humble? And do we decide that there is potentially a new aesthetic that's coming or that's here, and we need to kind of get with that?
I've thought a lot about it, and I think in my mind, sort of the analogy I've put together for myself is, the tower and the square.
Okay.
Right? We used to, and in some cases still do, sit in the tower. Right? We need to be in the square. The square is where culture is. It's where it's born. It's where it's happening. It's where everything emanates from. We got to get out of the tower, right? So it's going to take us having the humility of coming all the way down, joining the square, being in the square, and understanding that the idea is around us. The idea, that's the idea, right? And what that does is it shifts our responsibility from being the ones who thought they had the idea to the ones that are now orchestrating the ideas, right? So you've got people commenting here. It's super different. And it takes a certain, you still need taste. You still need, craft. You still need execute. You still need all the things you need. But it's a very different process, because where the idea is coming from is in the artful, or even what I like to call the soulful orchestration of the voices out there, because the idea is contained in there. And I struggle, today, since we're kind of like in this transition phase, I personally struggle with that transition where, you get that spark and you're like, that's the fucking idea. It's not the idea. It's not the idea. And what told us that idea was good before is wrong.
It's not the criteria.
It's not the criteria now. There's a new criteria.
100%.
And the fact that we can now use tools like AI to, create synthetic personas and create the conditions under which we can pre-optimize work, and we can intake the signals and the noise and start to weed it out and then start to feed it back in a way that articulates or editorializes that idea through the lens of our brand partners.
But that's a whole new approach. That's a whole new approach, from the origin of where it comes from to how you have to be able to identify the ideas from the noise. So you have to have a certain ear as an agency, as a partner. Then you bring it in, to your point, using AI to sort of get the cut through. Then you got to give it back to see how it. Now, who says that the square wants to take it back? Do you know what I mean? Because if you're a brand and you haven't got that standing in the community, it just could be crickets. You know what I mean? Like,
well, the whole point of being in the square and not in the tower is authenticity matters.
It's everything.
You can't be in the square if you're not going to be genuine and authentic, because the square will kick you out.
How do you think brands are getting their heads around that though? Like really being in the world, being authentic, being vulnerable, having humility. Do you know what I mean? Like, how do you,
I think we're seeing it. I think we're seeing it. I'm seeing a lot in beauty.
Beauty.
Because I do think it's an easier story to tell about the human, the human experience and how that is, the interplay between the products people use and kind of playing off their own vanity. But in such a beautiful way where everyone feels represented, because you have so many different voices taking the microphone and kind of creating a narrative that fits who they are.
One brand just on that I looked at and I thought had done a great job, and I saw a bit of learning was, and don't kill me for this, it was Victoria Beckham. Right? So Victoria Beckham, she launched a perfume, I want to say 2-3 years ago. Hollywood director, you can go on YouTube and see it, black and white, beautifully shot, craft, everything, like a bit of a film moment. And then she extends out and is launching her beauty products, and as a brand owner, she completely changed her approach.
Interesting.
And so you see her, again, you can just see this on YouTube, you see her launching an array of different makeup products, but she's giving daily tutorials, right? She's in her home. You can tell she's not overly made up. She's just woken up some days. She's being super real, right? And her brand is, I think, 87% increase year on year in sales, but it was more her brand was learning. And then if you look at her ready to wear, you can see that she's starting to take an approach of being much more human in how she goes to market with her collections. So it's Victoria Beckham. It's not, she has a certain standing already, you could argue, but you can see the humility. The counter argument is she is like a mini icon, and she's showing and demonstrating extreme humility to kind of learn with her people.
Well, it's the classic high-low, right? It's high-low. High-low, and people love high-low. If you, we see this in certain celebrities that have the ability to be iconic and humble at the same time. So I think what you're describing is her innate talent to have understood that you have to be both here and here at the same time, and that if you're just here, you can't be there, and if you're just here, it's kind of boring.
You need those moments.
You need both. And so, I think people can figure that out, but how do brands figure out that high-low? Especially since they're beholden to very specific audiences that have very specific needs. How do you create the conditions under which you're willing to relinquish probably a much greater share of voice than you are comfortable relinquishing and functioning under those conditions, right? So, you're
when the internal KPIs are like
exactly, that's what I was going to say. The street wants their numbers, there's sales, there's targets to hit, there's all of these business factors, and you're like, I am not in control of much of this, or are you, right? And that's where I kind of go back to this idea of being this soulful orchestrator, in which it's less about you controlling the single narrative, and it's more about you orchestrating a bevy of voices and consumers and points of views and lifestyles. I don't know how one does that. I just don't. I don't have the answer right now, but I do know that a lot of the tools
will help
that we're seeing, and I think a lot of probably what you and I both experienced coming up is now possible, affordable, scalable, all the things we ever imagined you can kind of do today. And I think the irony is that now we have to do it. Back in the day, we're like, oh, imagine we do this loyalty program that can
futurologists, right?
Futurologists. Because I think in the back of our minds, we wanted to do it, and we sometimes hacked it together. But we kind of knew it wasn't possible.
Right.
And it was fun to listen to. There's a limit.
What could be done.
But now there isn't.
There's no limit.
So I do think we need to find within ourselves the ability to understand how to take that orchestration, that content supply chain, the culture, and figure out like what our symphony is, right? What's the symphony that we're going to write for our brands, so that when they do this and this and this and this, it feels like Dior, or it feels like Nike.
It has a place.
It has a place,
and it's understood.
And the orchestration itself is branded, and I think that's where it's going. I don't know if in our lifetime we'll be like fully immersed, but to your point, I think we're responsible for writing that playbook, or at least the first chapter.
No, I agree. It's like brand as orchestrator, brand as enabler, brand as facilitator. These are things that at certain points we would talk to,
Right.
but we kind of brand as narrator.
It was nice in a room. Everyone loved to hear it.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it was like a verbal humility moment.
Right.
But now it's kind of like, these are the rules.
Yeah.
You know, so I think we got to get with it. I think we got to, we've also, I think that generationally inside agencies where for so long it would be, the senior people, you'd wait to get more and more senior. And then, the senior people were kind of a world apart. Right. If you think about when you came into the industry, right, they were a world apart. You didn't really know what they did, but they did something important, right? I think now we have to look at those who are coming in from a different generation, different mindset. And for me, progressive agencies are going to be the ones that give them the voice.
Yeah.
So that same relinquish, the act of relinquishing control, the brands need to really get with, and we've been talking about this for so many years. I actually think agencies internally need to also get with that, right? Because we're all consumers, they're living it though. Right. Like for whatever I don't want to say my age, but I'm not 20 or 30 or 40, right? So they are living and experiencing things that we're not, and there's so much that they could teach brand agency owners and leaders and brand owners and leaders. 100%. But the way that agencies traditionally work is you gotta pay your dues.
That's the tower. You got to be in the square. Yeah, even in the agency. You know what I mean? Yeah, you got to get back into the square.
You can't be in the room with that client because that client's senior. Right. But the senior clients want to know what's happening in the square.
Yep.
And I think there's a lot of missed opportunities for agencies to flip it.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
Like do away with the old hierarchy and the tower and kind of get clients to experience what that square is about and where the ideas are going and where the motivation, conversation and the community are all at, and then start from there. But that's different.
That sounds really refreshing.